Hello, hello, hello. I am apparently live now, and we get to talk about archiving lots and lots and lots of stuff to the cloud so y'all can learn from my mistakes. And yeah, so I thought this was going to be interesting. I thought this was going to be fun. I thought that I was going to help my client really, really well. And I discovered I should have thought about some few extra things than I did. So everybody here will have an opportunity to kind of learn from the process that I went through, and hopefully not run into a couple of the speed bumps that I did. So let me kind of lay out the process, what we're talking about, the example, and it will make things make a little bit more sense than what they might just from looking at the slides. So, all right, let's lay out what's going on. So first off, what do we have going on? Well, we've got a bunch of players here, the most important being the client, my customer, the person that I've been working with for over 10 years to make sure that their data is safe, make sure that their data is available, and make sure it will continue to be that way for as long as we could possibly predict. We'll talk about who the client is or the specifics of the client in a little bit, but let me kind of lay out what we were going to do. So the client had 263 terabytes, give or take a couple of gigabytes here or there, that were living on some Nexan storage up in New York City. It was across two E48s, actually an E48 and an E48X, so 96 spinning drives that had been doing its job wonderfully for 7 years. And it was getting to the point where, one, we were already kind of planning on its replacement because it had done its job well for so long. We were starting to get a little bit concerned just for the longevity of the hardware. And even though Nexan makes a heck of a product, these are things you need to think about. So when I was presented with the project that they were going to be moving from New York City down to Pennsylvania, where they already had an office, my concern was we shut off hard drives that have been spinning continuously for 7 years. Experience tells me they don't always start up again, nor do the fans. Stuff can run just fine for ages, and then just when they cool down, they don't want to start again. So do we have backups? Yeah, we had backups. Did we have additional copies elsewhere? Yeah. But to try to reproduce all that information in the format that it was in would have been a major, major process, problem, sort of a pain, quite honestly. So it behooved us to try to get the information to stay in the form that it was and in a safe manner. So thinking about this, and we'd been talking about trying to move this information to the cloud anyway, so we have the information from New York, the information that resided in Pennsylvania, and they were roughly copies of one another. And we also had 1 million hard drives with the raw information sitting on it. The issue was we didn't necessarily want to have to reproduce all this stuff and also lose one of these copies, basically meaning we'd have one full copy and then have to rely on all the other hard drives. So that just was not something that we wanted to do. Okay, so I kind of gathered up the troops. I knew that I wanted to use ArchAware Archive, just not for the move, but to move forward and to just use that processing. We needed a place to put the information. So I figured, you know what? I've got great experience with Backblaze. They've been very responsive, and the price was right. So Backblaze was the winner there. So we had where the information was, Nexan, where it was going to go, Backblaze, and then how we were going to get it there. And that was going to be through ArchAware P5 archive module. Wonderful. So you had me, you also had the client. So the issue with the client is this is the man's life work, and we couldn't really afford to mess it up. We needed to have everything stay consistent, stay viable, and yeah, is everything going to be good? Yes, as I mentioned, we had backups, didn't want to have to use them. It just would have been ages to try to reproduce what we had. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about the actual process. Well, same process that any one of us would have used. We planned it out. We figured out who it was we needed to get involved. We needed to do it. There's always going to be some issues here or there. Completely recognize that. There's never a process that is absolutely 100% flawless. There's always something that needs to be tweaked, changed, fixed, updated, whatever it is. But in my case, there were a few things that I learned. And when you go from moving a few terabytes here, a few terabytes there, to hundreds of terabytes, things change. There are different scales that are involved, and that's really where I ran into the issues that I did, plus one major goof on my part. So let's talk about that. So what I did right, so this is going to be a combination of things that I did right, things that I did wrong, things that I would change. So the first thing I did was I set expectations. And in terms of setting expectations, these were expectations to the client. I was very clear. I said, we can move your physical hardware from New York to Pennsylvania, but there is no guarantee that it is going to continue to work. I explained why. He understood. We've run into similar situations with other hardware in the past. He got it. But I felt it was critical to be honest and not just say, yeah, everything should be fine. We'll be okay. Because that's when everything just falls apart, right? I mean, that is what happens. Anytime that you say, this is just going to work out just wonderful, that's when the gods play with the measly humans. So we decided not to do that. We're going to set this up in a way to best guarantee the solutions that we have. So that was a win. Expectations were set. No problem there. Here is where it gets a little bit interesting. Now, I will admit that since I had done pretty much all of the pieces of this process, I was pretty confident that, yeah, no problem. We'll do this. Everything will be fine. The problem came in that I didn't identify a couple of small but very significant pieces that ended up being an issue. We'll talk about those as we go along. But a dry run, I think, would have, well, I don't want to say that I didn't do a dry run. I kind of did a synthetic dry run. I did dry runs of the pieces of it, but I never really did step A to step Z, moving on to 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, I did this piece of it, I did that piece of it, and they all worked out fine. That was a mistake. It wouldn't have been a problem if this was a smaller data set. It turned out to be a problem because the data set was as big as it is. I'll explain those in a bit. All right, so here's something that I did right. I organized the resources. This was getting in touch with all of the pieces of the puzzle. And that was the people, and that was the client's people, because he has an office full of people that I needed to interface with. We knew that this was going to take a long time, so we needed to kind of set the expectations there of when we would need people and what they would need to do. I needed to reach out to the vendors to make sure that they were kind of on board with what we were doing and available. We'll get back to that. That was a gotcha. Available when I needed them to be available. Also, did we have everything physical, all the physical pieces that we were going to need? And it turned out we were pretty good on that part. So we'll get into the nitty gritty in a moment, but that worked out okay. Contingencies. Here's another case where I think that we did okay. The contingencies were, if everything just went to heck, the moving the data to the cloud somehow failed, or it ended up in a form that wasn't usable, what were we going to do? So we talked about it, and I came up with a few solutions there. We agreed upon them. It was everything anything from using their now one contiguous piece of data as the sort of seed, reproduce that, try to figure out what we might be missing from it, go from there, or reconstitute it from all of the external hard drives that they had, which I really didn't want to have to do. But honestly, I did not want to get us into a position where we only had the one copy of the contiguous data. So we had our contingencies in place. So timing. This is a failure. This is where I was not right. I knew that moving this data was going to take a long time. So what was going to be the process? The process was this. We worked with Backblaze. Backblaze sent us 4 of their Fireball transfer NASs. They sent them over. We set them up. We got everything connected, and we started copying. And this is where I realized, wait a second, 2 things. One, they're only gigabit. Now, they had multiple gigabit ports. I could have used link aggregation, but I wasn't on site. And to try to program the switches to do everything, it would have been a bit of a nightmare. So even though we were copying 4 archive streams at a shot, it still took darn close to a month to move everything over. And that, what I didn't consider was the occasional failure. Every once in a while, a job would stop, or the hardware would restart, or a network connection would decide to go down. And sometimes, even though that I spent an awful lot of time monitoring it, sometimes I missed it, and I would lose hours of potential transfer time, sometimes upwards of 8 hours before the problem was found and rectified. So the timing got a little bit sketchy, and really needed to be a little bit tighter with it due to the amount of data. If we were talking 20, let's say under 100 terabytes, probably wouldn't have been much of an issue at all. Okay, we missed a few hours, no big deal. We'll start it over again, we're good. Or restart the job. Yeah, we're fine. But 263, and we had some time pressures because they were going to be out of the space. Should have done a little bit more calculation there, or been a little bit more realistic within my head about how long this was going to take. I knew it was going to take a long time, but it took longer than expected. Okay. So I mentioned that we used the fireballs, and in discussion with Backblaze, they said, oh, they've got this much capacity, and they'll be fine. Well, when we got them, it was about, I think they told us 7 terabytes each at the time. Ended up being something like 63, maybe 64. I don't remember what the exact formatted version was. But as it turned out, that caused us a little bit of consternation, because when I did all my calculations and set up the jobs, I was expecting 70 terabytes. And I probably should have been a little bit more specific with them with what the capacity was in terms of my questioning. And now I know to be a little bit tighter with those pieces of information. Now, since then, Backblaze has modified their fireballs, and they're now all 10 gigabit Ethernet, which is great. And they have increased the capacity of each individual unit by, I don't remember what the actual number is, but it's a significant amount. So that's good. If we did this process again, it would take a lot less time, and it would probably be 3, maybe even 2 fireballs rather than 4. So yeah, so that was a concern. All right, items out of your control. So this was interesting. So in the process, so what I did was we set up jobs in ArchAware Archive to go to the VTLs that were formed on the fireballs. Great, very standard, normal stuff. But I don't know that even Backblaze or potentially ArchAware had done this specific setup where we had 4 archives going at the same time that would be reconstituted in the cloud. I think that they probably, and I may be wrong with this, but it seemed like they've done 1, maybe 2, but not 4. And in the process, I made one major mistake. And if you know ArchAware Archive, when you disconnect from the VTL, or if it was a real tape library as opposed to virtual, there's a detach process and then a reattach process. And I missed it. I goofed. I didn't do the proper detach process. So we ended up shipping the fireballs back to Backblaze and discovered that we could not just instantly go click, click, and reattach the archive jobs to the now in Backblaze B2 buckets archive VTLs. All right. So after a few terrifying moments, I questioned, what can we do? So this is where ArchAware and Backblaze stepped up. They helped me out. The importance of having great partners to help you in these situations cannot be underestimated or overstated. So ArchAware had to put on a couple of engineers to solve the problem for me, to fix my problems. And that wouldn't be an issue at any other day, but I happened to catch them right before they were going to release, I think, version 6.1. So, I mean, literally like days before the release. So all of their engineering resources were tied up with the release, and they needed to kind of fit me in. They needed to take what little time they had, which was none because it's right before a major release, and help me fix my problems. And they did. But it took a little bit extra time. In the meantime, the customer was never breathing down my neck, but I felt the pressure myself to get this done. So they got people to help me. It got fixed. It works great. Everything was wonderful. Everything worked out exactly the way that we had hoped it to end up. You know, end result was exactly where we wanted to get to. But I had some lumps to get there. So just as a review, the problems that I ran into were mostly self-inflicted. I hadn't quite considered the impact of scale. I thought I had, but I found out that there were issues that I just couldn't have thought about prior, which is why I wanted to put on this presentation, because when you're looking at the amount of data that we are, 263 terabytes versus a couple of dozen, issues of time, issues of resources, issues of availability of resources, and both human and otherwise, become that much more critical. So I just wanted people to realize that with scale comes different problems. And I don't know that Backblaze had really had anybody go, oh, is that enough space on those? Because they just thought they did. Or, gigabit Ethernet, that's fine, it's going across the network. Well, 10 gig, I had 10 gig of switch. I had all the servers on 10 gig switches. Would have been great to have 10 gig. Well, now they do. And that helps out. So I learned a lot. I got to where I needed to be. I will now be able to help additional customers and clients in a much more smooth way. Although I certainly acted as the description of a duck, real calm on the surface and just furiously paddling away underneath. That's kind of how I felt for the full month that this took. So I was always honest with the customer. You have to be honest with the customer, and they were fine. They're happy with the results. We've got more data to move up to the cloud. Backblaze was awesome. ArchAware was awesome. And I know somebody's going to ask, so what happened to the physical hardware, the Nexan gear that got moved from New York to Pennsylvania? Guess what? Worked perfectly. Worked absolutely fine. Yeah. Pulled it out of the truck, stuck it in the rack, hooked it up, powered it on. Worked fine. But you know what? No point did I ever say to myself, wow, we really didn't need to do that. And the reality is, yeah, we really needed to do that. And end result, we've got 2 physical pools of data. We have a cloud pool of data that now is archived, can be searched. Thumbnails can be reviewed, which is wonderful. Everything was a much better situation at the end. I did have to install some new cache batteries in the Nexans, come to think of it. It wasn't 100%, but none of the drives died. We actually replaced a couple of drives before the move. So yeah, I'm getting towards the end of my time. I'm going to be jumping over to the QA in a couple of minutes. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm sure that I left out some details that you might be interested in, but that's what the Q&A is for. I didn't want to bother you with the actual what I did, but what I missed, because that's what was kind of, we're all professionals here. I think we all know what we do, but it's the little gotchas that really help you learn and grow. So I'll stop here and join you over on the Q&A in Discord. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was helpful and interesting and help you to avoid some of the pitfalls that I did. So thank you.